In the early hours of the 26th of June 2022, 29-year-old career criminal Jordan McSweeney was drunk and lurking around the streets of Ilford, a town in East London in the UK, looking for a woman to rape. He'd already been kicked out of a pub for groping a woman and was combing the streets looking for a victim. He'd already followed at least 4 women who'd managed to escape when he spotted 35-year-old aspiring solicitor Zara Aleena, a young woman with her whole life ahead of her, who was walking the short distance home from a night out. McSweeney followed Zara, then attacked her, dragging her into the driveway of a house where he subjected her to a horrific attack. He sexually assaulted her, strangled her, and savagely beat her, including kicking and stamping on her head. He then left Zara to die in the street. She was found by a member of the public, still alive, but the 46 separate horrific injuries she suffered had caused catastrophic trauma to her body, and Zara soon lost her fight for life. This case caught the national attention. A young woman viciously attacked by a complete stranger. It hit at the very heart of our fear that we, or a loved one, could go out one day and then never come home. Horror turned to anger when it was revealed that Jordan McSweeney had a long criminal history and had only been out of prison for 9 days when he killed Zara, and on the day he committed this crime, he should have been back behind bars. However, staggering failings by the probation service meant that he was free to kill. Welcome to Evil Among Us. Jordan McSweeney was born in 1993 in Dagenham in East London, but when he was still an infant, the family moved to Borstal, a suburb of the town of Rochester in Kent, which is in the southeast of England. McSweeney had an extremely turbulent upbringing. His mother was a drug addict who was more interested in getting her next fix than raising her children. In court, it was stated that McSweeney had called his mother a, quote, very spiteful, vindictive, and horribly poisonous person. McSweeney's father was barely in his life, and when he was a violent bully who subjected McSweeney's mother to horrific acts of domestic abuse, including beating her savagely and trying to drown her in the bath, all whilst their small son watched. Neighbours who knew the family later confirmed the domestic situation and that McSweeney was a chronically neglected child. As years progressed, his mother would have a succession of partners, all violent, who would beat her up but also victimise McSweeney. Like many children from a similar background, McSweeney sought comfort the only place he could, on the streets, and he soon fell in with other neglected children whose parents were either entirely absent from their lives or simply didn't care where they were or what they were doing. Before he turned 10 years old, McSweeney was going around the local area causing a nuisance to the community. One neighbour later stated, quote, Jordan was bad. Another said that he was, quote, a little shit. McSweeney did go to school, but he was almost always truant and was known as a violent thug, which quickly led to him being expelled. However, McSweeney was not interested in education. He was interested in 2 things: money and making a reputation for himself. By his mid-teens, McSweeney was selling drugs and also participating in bare-knuckle boxing fights for money. He would also go around battering anyone and everyone he perceived as weaker than him. He would take great pleasure in catching the eye of someone he knew he could easily dominate physically and saying things like, "What are you looking at?" He was a bully and a coward. In 2005, aged 12, his criminal record began when he received a reprimand from the police for 2 counts of assault related to him fighting in the street. However, this was just a fraction of the offences he was committing and the antisocial behaviour he was involved in. McSweeney and his friends would ride around the pavements on motorcycles, deliberately driving close to elderly people to scare them, and zooming past people with dogs to scare the animals. The group were also going around stealing anything that wasn't nailed down and smashing up people's property. They would soon escalate to breaking into people's shops and eventually their homes. Individually, Jordan McSweeney was described as a polite, baby-faced teenager, but he would smile sweetly to someone that he'd known all of his life, but then be hurling abuse at them later when he was with his friends, or breaking into their homes for a quick payday. He would brag to people about double-crossing and backstabbing friends and family. If it would benefit him, McSweeney would do it. He had no loyalty to anyone. McSweeney's behaviour went unchecked. He'd never been taught boundaries or the value of other people or their property. If anyone dared to call the police, then he and his group of thugs would target and victimise these people. One person who knew McSweeney later recalled calling the police about his antisocial behaviour and a car then being targeted and the windows smashed. Quickly, the local community found that McSweeney was someone not to cross. His behaviour was unpredictable due to the fact that McSweeney, from around the age of 14 years old, would spend most days drinking vast quantities of alcohol and taking drugs, including snorting line after line of cocaine. In 2006 and 2009, McSweeney ended up before the courts for burglaries and thefts. The latter of these convictions resulted in his first spell in prison. In 2010, so when he was 17, McSweeney badly assaulted a teenage girl who'd rejected him. He responded by slapping her in the face, giving her a swollen eye. This conviction, on paper, is the first indicator of the most relevant part of this case, McSweeney's risk to women, but this was something that had been obvious for a number of years, but had not resulted in conviction. Specifically, after his conviction for murder in 2022, a woman called Samantha Bryan came forward, who said that she'd been in a relationship with Jordan McSweeney for around 4 years, from around 2007 to 2011, and she described horrific abuse, with there being disturbing parallels between McSweeney's treatment of her and the murder of Zara Aleena years later. In particular, she reported repeated savage violence at the hands of Jordan McSweeney, where he would get her on the ground and proceed to kick her in the head and stamp on her face. She also described an incident where he kicked the door off its hinges to get to her and then began chasing her around a room. In addition to this, he would bite and pinch her, acts which were deliberately employed to cause her the maximum amount of pain. After these incidents, he would then apologise, blaming his abuse on the fact that he had had a bad childhood. His abuse was not just physical, it was also mental. McSweeney would humiliate Samantha in front of her friends and family. She eventually separated from McSweeney permanently in 2011 when he was around 18 years old, but only after one last horrifying incident. Specifically, McSweeney knocked Samantha to the floor, began stamping on her head. She was able to call the police and was taken to hospital, but she was told by doctors that she was lucky she hadn't lost her sight. Samantha was too scared to press charges. After this, her mother worked to cut off any avenue of communication with McSweeney, and Samantha, luckily, never saw him again. However, although 11 years had passed by the time she spoke to the press, Samantha said the trauma she suffered from McSweeney was still with her, and she recalled almost prophetically, quote, "My mum always said, from when I was in a relationship with him, he's going to end up killing someone." Breaking here, it's necessary to highlight who Jordan McSweeney was at this point and why. He was a deeply damaged man whose childhood had been dominated by violence. Initially, this involved him being a small child, witnessing and being subjected to this behaviour, but he soon learned that this was the way to behave, the way to get respect, treat others that annoyed him, target those weaker than him, and even make money. In his mind, there was no problem that couldn't be solved with violence. Running alongside this was a hatred of women. This inevitably stemmed from his mother. It's clear that McSweeney despised his mother, likely for choosing drugs over him and not protecting him from the abuse of her various partners. Jordan McSweeney's upbringing had also given him no concept of boundaries. He felt entitled to do whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. If he wanted money, he would rob and steal, and if anyone tried to stop him, he would beat them up or smash up their property. Whilst this was his mentality generally, due to his hatred of women, the most savage and sadistic violence was reserved for them. If any woman did not give him what he wanted, then he would subject them to horrific acts of violence. By his late teens/early adulthood, he'd already demonstrated he was willing to act in a manner that could easily cause them to lose their sight or even their lives by kicking and stamping on their heads. Given his serious risk to women, even at a young age, it is, in some respects, surprising that McSweeney didn't kill anyone earlier in his life, but this was primarily because he was a career criminal who spent most of his adult life behind bars. Between 2009 and 2019, so between the ages of 16 and 26, Jordan McSweeney was sent to prison 6 times, almost entirely related to burglary. There was a repeating pattern. McSweeney would go to prison, come out, and within months, weeks, or even days, go straight back to a life of crime, violating the security of people's homes to make money for himself, which would then be used to fund his alcohol and drug binges. And this is how McSweeney saw society and the people in it, merely as opportunities. When he came out, this was his green light to cause as much chaos as possible, to get as high and as drunk as possible, until he was sent back inside, where he could get 3 meals a day and a roof over his head until the next time he was released, and round he went. Prison meant nothing to Jordan McSweeney. Rules meant nothing to him. Other people meant nothing to him. McSweeney's world was solely about him, getting what he wanted and punishing those who stood in his way. On the 28th of September 2020, Jordan McSweeney was again released from prison on licence, and the same pattern emerged, with him quickly going back to his old ways. It's alleged that he almost immediately robbed and beat up a female friend of his mother's. However, there wasn't enough evidence to convict him of this. Instead, he was sent back to prison just 4 months later, due to his behaviour during a previous spell inside. This included him racially abusing prison staff, making improvised weapons, and smashing up his cell. And so, back he went to prison, where he will remain until his next release on the 17th of June 2022, just 9 days before he murdered Zara Aleena. A woman, in complete contrast to him, was caring, loving, selfless, and who wanted to contribute to this world and not simply take. Zara Natasha Aleena was born in 1986 into a close-knit Pakistani family. Unfortunately, Zara's father left when she was young, but the family stepped up, and everyone, aunts, uncles, grandparents and cousins, all raised her. The family didn't have much money, but they wanted the best for Zara, and so what they did have, they put into her education, with them giving her the tools to go far in the world, but the drive to get there came from her. Zara devoured knowledge. She did well in school and would spend time going around the capital, going to galleries and museums, wanting to expand her mind. From a young age, she wanted to be a solicitor, in particular one specialising in immigration law, so she could protect the rights of others. However, Zara had to balance her studies with her responsibilities, which she took very seriously. Both her mother and grandmother had significant health issues, and she was their carer. She would walk between their homes on Cranbrook Road, in the town of Ilford in East London, several times a day to look after them. She had a bedroom in each house, so she could stay overnight if she needed to, and it was to one of these properties she was walking on the night of her murder. Her family came first, so it wasn't until her 30s that Zara could pursue her dream. She obtained a place to study law at the University of Westminster and worked hard to get her degree. Just 5 weeks before her murder, Zara obtained a job in admin at the Royal Courts of Justice. On her first day, she was ecstatic and sent an excited, smiling selfie to her family and friends. She had her foot in the door, and she was confident she would soon work her way up to being a fully qualified solicitor, the career she'd been dreaming of since she was a child. Zara was a beautiful, intelligent, motivated and strong woman who cared fiercely for her family and the rights of others, and she was within touching distance of her goals. Her future was cruelly snatched away from her by one pathetic coward. Zara was also a popular woman. After her death, a friend of hers shared a heartbreaking text message exchange sent just 48 hours before her murder, where the pair had planned to meet up the next weekend. On the evening of Saturday the 25th of June 2022, Zara Aleena left her home in Cranbrook Road in Ilford and walked the short distance to the town centre to meet a friend for a night out. They first went to a local pub called the Great Spoon of Ilford, where they had some drinks and dinner before walking a short distance to a local bar, where they stayed until around 2 a.m. on Sunday the 26th of June. Zara's friend said goodbye to her and got a taxi. Zara walked everywhere, and today was no different. She decided to walk home. It was a warm evening. This was a walk she'd done a million times before, and it would only take her 30 minutes. So she began on her way. Unfortunately, she could not have known that a dangerous predator was stalking the streets, looking for a woman to attack, and their paths would soon tragically cross. As I've already stated, On the evening of Saturday the 25th of June 2022, into the early hours of Sunday the 26th of June, Zara Aleena was in Ilford town centre, spending time with a friend. During the same time period, Jordan McSweeney was also lurking the streets of the town. He'd been released from custody just 9 days before and was wanted for recall back to prison, but, as I'll get into later, management of his case by the probation service was appalling. They didn't know his location, and he'd been given chance after chance to comply, but despite this, he'd been allowed to remain at liberty. His return to prison should have been initiated on the day of his release, but it wasn't. He'd spent the days since his release in a drunken, drug-induced stupor in London before contacting a friend of his who was working as a travelling fun fair in Valentine's Park in Ilford. This man was staying in a caravan and offered McSweeney a place to stay, which he accepted. On the evening of the 25th of June 2022, Jordan McSweeney went from this caravan into Ilford town centre and began drinking heavily. He went into the same pub that Zara had been in, the Great Spoon of Ilford, but she'd moved on by the time he arrived. McSweeney began to sexually harass women, trying to kiss them and rubbing himself against them. He groped the breasts of one woman and tried to sexually assault a barmaid. Security got involved, and he was kicked out at around 11 p.m. As with much of his behaviour that night, Jordan McSweeney staggering away was caught on CCTV. McSweeney then spent the next 3 hours staggering around the streets, both on Cranbrook Road, the site of the eventual attack, but also streets coming off of this. He was looking for a woman to sexually assault. McSweeney proceeds to follow at least 4 women before he attacked Zara. He followed this woman, who went into a shop to try to escape. McSweeney then entered, stood for a while, and left. The woman had hidden herself behind some shelves. She waited a few minutes and then emerged, but McSweeney had also hidden himself, out of the way, waiting for her to come out. She began walking and saw McSweeney striding towards her. She then ran for her life, with McSweeney chasing her, but she was able to outrun him. He then began to follow another woman, shown by the blue arrow. She noticed she was being followed and crossed the road, but he kept pace. She was eventually able to dart inside her house and lock the door. McSweeney then staggered outside a local chicken shop, where a woman was inside. He stood outside, staring at her through the window, and had his hands in his trousers appearing to masturbate. He waited outside the shop until she left, and began following her, but only for a short distance, until his attention fell on another woman, standing outside a community centre. It's not known whether McSweeney knew this woman, as she's never been traced, but he went over to her, spoke to her, and pushed his hands between her legs before she pushed him off. They then walked for a short distance, before he got bored and walked off. The last woman that McSweeney followed before attacking Zara was walking home, where she realised there was a man behind her keeping pace. She sped up, and he did the same. He followed her into Northbrook Road, a short distance away from Cranbrook Road. McSweeney then overtook her, and was seen on CCTV stooping down in a driveway slightly up the road, waiting for her to come past, inevitably so he could attack her. However, luckily for this woman, she lived in a property before this point, on the opposite side of the road, and had reached safety and slammed the door behind her. This was at around 2 a.m, and McSweeney then walked back towards Cranbrook Road, the same moment that Zara was walking home along the same street. It was at this junction that Jordan McSweeney first saw Zara Aleena, with her walking in this direction up the road. He then crossed over and began to follow her. Jordan McSweeney followed Zara up the road for approximately 15 minutes, and at 2:17 a.m, he attacked. McSweeney approached Zara from behind at speed, grabbing her, placing one arm around her neck and putting his other hand over her mouth. He then dragged her from the pavement into the driveway of a house on Cranbrook Road. CCTV at this property caught part of the attack. Zara struggled and fought against McSweeney, who began punching her. He then forced her to the ground, pushed apart her legs, but Zara was able to get up before being grabbed and forced back down onto the ground again. McSweeney then knocked Zara unconscious and began kicking her head and stamping on her face. At some point, McSweeney also strangled Zara. When she was on the ground not moving, McSweeney removed some of Zara's clothing, including her underwear, and attempted to rape her. As if this crime wasn't horrific enough, McSweeney then got up, walked a short distance away before returning to deliver more vicious stamps on Zara's head. He held onto a post, leaving a bloody fingerprint in order to balance himself and enable him to put as much force as possible into every stamp and kick. He then decided to rob Zara, taking her phone and handbag before walking away. However, he returned again for a final time and continued to stamp on Zara's head and chest. He then left the scene, and CCTV cameras captured him returning to the caravan he was staying in at the time. As a result of the attack, Zara received 46 separate horrific injuries. She had severe blunt force trauma to her head, which had caused catastrophic brain damage. She also had deep cuts to her scalp, bruising to her lips, eyes, nose, mouth, and jaw from being stamped on and kicked. She also had injuries to her genitals. The ordeal that Zara endured lasted 9 minutes. Zara was alive when 2 passers-by found her unconscious and covered in blood in the driveway where she'd been attacked at 2:44 a.m. They called an ambulance from the police. She was taken to the Royal London Hospital, but her injuries were too extensive, and, after bravely holding on, Zara Aleena passed away at 9:58 a.m. on Sunday the 26th of June 2022. She was just 35 years old. Within hours of the attack, police obtained CCTV along the entire route of Zara Aleena's journey, as well as the doorbell footage covering the area of the attack itself. This enabled them to quickly establish that she'd been followed and that the man who'd been stalking her was the one that attacked her. They also found footage of this same man following multiple other women. This grainy footage enabled inquiries to be made about potential suspects, and several names were put forward, including that of Jordan McSweeney. A bloody fingerprint was found at the scene of the attack, but it was too poor quality to be fed directly into the national database and had to be analysed by hand. This was compared to fingerprints held on suspects, which had been named during the inquiries, and it was found to match Jordan McSweeney. CCTV footage was also able to trace McSweeney back to the caravan site at Valentine's Park. At around 3:30 p.m. on the 27th of June 2022, the day after the murder, the police descended on the area. They asked people at the site whether they knew Jordan McSweeney. They said they did. When asked where he was, they pointed to a caravan and said that he was asleep inside. The police entered and arrested him, as shown by this body cam footage.
Jordan McSweeney. Jordan. 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 Jordan McSweeney.
Got cuffs on, yeah.
Can you stand up for us, mate?
Just tell him.
You're under arrest for rape and murder of a female at Cranbrook Road, okay, on the 26th of June 2022 in the early hours of the morning. You do not have to say anything, but it may harm your defence if you do not mention when questioned something you later rely on in court. Anything you do say may be given in evidence. Do you understand? Right, stand up for us then, mate. Stand up.
All right.
Okay.
I've got it. Yep. Come forward.
Just going to search you now, alright?
Whilst it's not shown in that piece of footage, it's reported that McSweeney yawned loudly when he was hauled off by the police and said they were boring him. When asked about blood on his clothing, Zara's blood, he claimed this was his own and was due to a dog bite. In custody, showing the thug that he was aggressive to officers and challenged them to a fight. However, when in interview, he simply sat there repeating no comment over and over again. His silence didn't matter. The police had CCTV footage and forensic evidence tying him to the crime, and Jordan McSweeney was charged with the murder of Zara Aleena and remanded into prison to await his day in court. Jordan McSweeney appeared at the Old Bailey in London on the 3rd of November 2022 and pleaded guilty to the murder of Zara Aleena. His sentence was due to take place at the same court on the 14th of December. This pathetic excuse for a man refused to attend the sentencing hearing. I completely agree that people like this should be dragged to the hearing to face their punishment, But then, on the other hand, I imagine they would kick off and be disruptive. This would likely cause the family of the victim, if they were present, even more distress. It's a no-win situation. Like the proceedings themselves, whilst McSweeney could be sent to prison forever, it wouldn't bring Zara back. So, due to his cowardice, the sentencing judge, Mrs. Justice Chima Grubb, read out her sentencing remarks as though McSweeney was present in the courtroom. This was again one of the few occasions where cameras were allowed in the court to film proceedings, so I want to play the sentence for you.
I have taken care to avoid double counting. The sexual assault is a Category 1A offence because the defendant used violence and threats and abducted the victim from the street. There was a significant degree of premeditation because he wandered around the area until he found the ideal circumstances in which to commit the offence. This was a particularly violent sexual assault committed at night in a public place on a woman out alone. The defendant removed Miss Aleena's knickers and caused injuries to her genitalia, as well as the injuries that led to her death. The sentence for that offence of sexual assault, had I been dealing with it alone, would have been 6 years imprisonment. Taking into account his history of offending, had there not been a guilty plea. I would allow 1/3 discount for the plea. I take the view that this offence is already incorporated into the minimum term for murder because I have taken the higher starting point of 30 years and I reflect the aggravating features of it in the minimum term for the murder. Having been arrested on the 27th of June, the defendant was charged with murder and rape on the 29th of June. On reception in prison, he indicated that he could not comprehend that he had done what he had done. He appeared for a preliminary hearing on the 1st of July 2022 and his PTPH was set for the 30th of September 2022. Prior to the listing, the solicitors acting for the defendant wrote to the court to inform them that they had not received an expert report commissioned from a psychiatrist because the defendant had not seen him. Furthermore, owing to the industrial action being taken by the defence bar, his instructed advocate would not be present. Accordingly, I adjourned the hearing to the 19th of October and an extension was given for service of the defence statement. The defendant failed, without a reasonable excuse, to attend 2 appointments with the psychologist on the 21st of September and the 3rd of October. The solicitors wrote to the court again to request a further adjournment. When the case came before the court for PTPH on the 19th of October, the defendant refused to attend, and it became apparent that he had not attended a conference that had been arranged with his solicitors. The defence were directed to secure the services of a psychologist who could provide a report as soon as possible, and the PTPH was adjourned to the 24th of October. On that date, the solicitors still did not have a report, and the PTPH was adjourned once again to the 11th of November. In the report of Dr. Black, which is dated the 26th of October, and which was, I'm sure, in the hands of the defence soon after that date, the defendant suggests that he did not remember what had happened, and he could not believe what he was seeing when shown the CCTV in interview. In fact, at the police interviews after arrest, the defendant affected a bored and disinterested facade. The defendant was not produced at the next hearing because he tested positive for COVID. The PTPH was put back to the 16th of November. Despite a direction that he attend in person, the defendant refused to come to court on the 16th of November and a video link had to be arranged. The defence took instructions from the defendant and approached the prosecution about potential pleas, and this was indicated to the court. The PTPH was adjourned to the 19th of November, and on that occasion, the defendant pleaded guilty to the preferred 2-count indictment, murder and sexual assault. I accept that the defence solicitors commissioned expert reports to ensure there was no psychiatric defence to the charge of murder and to ensure fitness to plead and to be tried. These were responsible steps in a case of such gravity. I also accept that because of the action taken by criminal barristers, the defendant was not able to receive advice from junior barristers or King's Counsel until October this year. I reject the suggestion from the defence that because he was heard on a prison phone telling his mother that he was banged to rights, he should be taken to have indicated at a very, very early stage that he would accept responsibility for the killing. He never indicated this to the court until the 16th of November, and at stages his non-engagement frustrated the work being done on his behalf. In addition, as Mr. Carter Stevenson accepted in his written submission on sentence, he caused some additional delay through taking a belligerent attitude when required to come to court, including telling the jailers on one occasion that there was no point in attending a hearing at which he was required. Overall, my conclusion is that the defendant is entitled to less than the maximum discount on the murder count, and I would allow 1/8. Although given the length of the term I will impose, the maximum discount allowed can be 5 years. Considering all these features, after a trial the minimum term would have been 43 years. I allow 5 years, as I have said, for the plea of guilty indicated via counsel on the 16th of November, a few weeks before trial. A sentence of 4 years concurrent is imposed for sexual assault. The sentence for the brutal, sexually motivated murder of Zara Aleena is imprisonment for life. The defendant will serve 38 years as the minimum term. The court would like to thank counsel and also to commend Mr. and Mrs. Condor, Georgina Woolard and Maria Bergen.
So, to clarify, for the murder of Zara Aleena, Jordan McSweeney was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum tariff of 38 years to serve before he can apply for parole. It would be naive of me to say that no one who pleads guilty to murder does so because they genuinely feel sorry for what they've done and are willing to accept their punishment. However, this couldn't be further from the truth in the case of McSweeney. Clearly he knew he'd been convicted and pleaded guilty in order to get a reduced sentence. His lack of remorse is shown firstly by him refusing to attend his sentencing hearing, but also the fact that he appealed his length of sentence. This hearing took place at the Court of Appeal in October 2023. I've read the court ruling, and it's a really upsetting document. So McSweeney, through his barrister, produced a number of points which he claimed the judge interpreted incorrectly when reaching her sentence. This included him claiming his actions were not premeditated. However, the appeal court obviously rejected that, considering he was following multiple women on the night of the murder. However, one of the points raised was that the judge made an error in determining that he caused Zara Aleena gratuitous mental or physical torment during this attack. The argument was that whilst his behaviour was extremely violent and the attack lasted 9 minutes, Zara was likely unconscious within 30 seconds of the start of the assault, and so would have not been aware of what was going on after this point. In essence, she couldn't have felt fear or pain during the majority of the attack because she was unconscious. The Court of Appeal agreed with this point, which I find disgusting. 30 seconds, in the grand scheme of things, is absolutely nothing, but if you're being attacked and fighting for your life, imagine it feels like an eternity. And during those last few seconds where she was aware, I imagine Zara felt absolutely terrified and had so many thoughts running through her head. Fear she would be raped, fear she would be killed, fear that she would never see her family again. I'm sorry, but I think the appeal court got this wrong. I don't believe that any appeal should have been considered, arguing this crime was less heinous or minimising Zara's suffering. However, regardless of my own thoughts, the Court of Appeal reduced Jordan McSweeney's sentence from a minimum of 38 years to a minimum of 33 years. Making this situation even more sickening is the fact that Jordan McSweeney could not even be bothered to stay for the whole of the appeal hearing and left halfway through. So essentially, he failed to attend 2 court hearings. Potentially that's the answer. If you don't bother to show up to your sentencing hearing, you cannot complain about it afterwards. If you don't bother to stay for your appeal, then we'll throw it out. Essentially, you don't turn up, well fuck you then. I'm sure someone with a legal background would provide a compelling explanation as to why this would be inappropriate, and I fully understand that. But from a human and emotional perspective, I do think that people like Jordan McSweeney are given far more consideration and humanity than they deserve. Despite the reduction in his sentence, Jordan McSweeney will not be eligible for parole until 2055, by which point he'll be in his 60s. Hopefully, he is never released. Jordan McSweeney had been released from prison only 9 days before he murdered Zara Aleena, and it's necessary at this point to highlight the failings in this case, which left an extremely dangerous man free to roam the streets to commit this horrific crime. As Jordan McSweeney was on licence under probation supervision at the time of the murder, a serious review was conducted to determine what mistakes, if any, made by professionals may have contributed to the death of Zara Aleena. The final report is a terrible look into the failings of the probation service, who are tasked to manage people like Jordan McSweeney when they're released from prison. A few things need to be explained in order to understand this case. Firstly, most prisoners who receive a custodial sentence in the court are automatically released at the halfway point of their sentence. This is not the case for life sentences, for example for murder, where their release is only directed by the parole board. However, in almost all other cases, people serve half their sentence in prison and half in the community. In the community, they're subject to a licence, which is a physical document with certain conditions on it. There are standard conditions, such as only residing in an address approved by the probation officer and attending all appointments, but the number and types of additional conditions are determined by the officer dealing with the case. Depending on the level of risk a person is assessed to pose, the type of offence they've committed, and their risk factors, there can be few or many additional conditions, which can range from drug and alcohol testing to staying away from certain people or places. It's basically a list of rules highlighting to the offender that being in the community is a privilege, and there are conditions attached to this. If an offender breaks the rules, they go back to prison, although they're usually given chances to correct their behaviour before this final step is taken. However, the mechanism should be that if an offender is displaying offence paralleling behaviour, which indicates they're likely to commit a serious offence, they should be recalled immediately. Informing how many chances an offender gets, the list of conditions they're subject to, and how they're generally managed are risk assessments completed by the probation officers. These should be based on thorough information gathering, not just documents from court, but essentially any scrap of information, for example police intelligence, which can be obtained to identify who the offender is, what their risk factors are, what their warning signs are, what they're likely to do when they come out of prison, and, if they were to commit another offence, what would this likely be, and what would be the resulting harm to others. Even from the information I've presented in this video, I think you yourself could see that Jordan McSweeney fits within the category known as high risk of serious harm, which is an indicator that, when he's in the community, he's likely to quickly commit a serious violent or sexual offence which may endanger or end the life of someone else, most likely a woman, and that him relapsing into alcohol and drug use would be a massive red flag that something was about to happen, as it would make his behaviour more unpredictable. Such an assessment would mean stricter oversight, more conditions, and less chances before being sent back to prison. It would also mean that McSweeney potentially should have been placed in a probation hostel, which is accommodation staffed 24 hours a day, where every movement of the offender is monitored. This is reserved for the most risky offenders, who are forced to live there and have to be back inside by a certain time each evening. This means any concerns can be acted on quickly, but also, if they disappear, recall can be started immediately, which involves their licence being revoked and a warrant issued for their arrest. The police then pick them up and take them back to prison. However, this wasn't the view of the probation officer in this case. They assessed that Jordan McSweeney posed what's known as a medium risk of serious harm. What that essentially means is that his risk factors were currently stable, and therefore he was unlikely to commit a serious offence soon after coming out of prison. This is a staggering line of thinking, given what we know about Jordan McSweeney. This meant no long list of conditions, no residing in a probation hostel, where he could be monitored closely, and he would be given more chances than he should in the community before finally being returned to prison. So on the 17th of June 2022, Jordan McSweeney was released from prison. It appears there was no clarity on his release plans, and his case was allocated to London probation, as he'd made some vague comments about wishing to relocate back to Dagenham, where he was originally from, as his mother had moved back to the area. His first duty from prison, as with any prison release, was to attend the probation office. He failed to do so. A few hours later, probation got a call from McSweeney's mother, saying he'd turned up at her house and that he was drunk and unconscious. McSweeney was given another chance, and a message was passed to him to attend the probation office sober on the 20th of June 2022. Now, in 99% of cases, if someone doesn't turn up on the day of their release, they'll be recalled immediately. Why this didn't happen in this case is unclear. On the 20th of June, McSweeney failed to show up. He was given a third opportunity, with a letter being sent to his mother's address to attend on the 22nd of June 2022. It was soon established that McSweeney's mother had not seen him since the day of his release. His whereabouts were completely unknown. To no one's surprise, he missed his appointment on the 22nd of June 2022, meaning the decision was finally taken to recall him back to prison. This process, at a maximum, should have been completed within 24 hours, but for some inexplicable reason, this was not signed off by a senior manager until the 24th of June, 48 hours later. This meant that although he'd not been in contact with probation for a week, and no one had any idea where he was or what he was doing, it wasn't until 4:10 PM on the 24th of June 2022, just a day and a half before the murder, that Jordan McSweeney's licence was officially revoked and a warrant issued for his arrest, enabling the police to begin looking for him and then take him back to prison. Of course, the police were on the back foot. They had no idea where McSweeney was. As I've already outlined, unknown to them and to the very people who should have been managing his risk, this dangerous career criminal had spent almost every hour since his release in an alcohol and drug-induced stupor and had been allowed to stay in a friend's caravan in Valentine's Park in Ilford. This is the location for where he would walk into town to start his campaign of predatory sexual behaviour towards women on the 25th of June and return to in the early hours of the next day after murdering Zara Aleena. The report about probation's oversight of this case was scathing. It's clear that Jordan McSweeney should have been assessed as high risk and recalled to prison on day one and not allowed to roam the streets. Of course, we'll never know, had this happened, if Zara Aleena's life could have been saved. The police would still have to have found him, but they would have been given a week to do this, and not just a day and a half. Personally, I think that Jordan McSweeney would have likely been safely behind bars at the time he killed Zara Aleena if he'd been recalled back to prison on the first day. It appears that due to chronic understaffing within London probation, McSweeney's case was given to an inexperienced officer. Unfortunately, the probation service, like many government-funded agencies, is completely underfunded. Despite money being available to pay for pay rises for MPs, there's apparently no money to recruit, train and maintain staff in a variety of professions which have a direct impact on helping and even saving lives, including doctors, nurses, teachers, the police, probation, etc. This is not to make excuses. More should have been done in this case without a doubt, but it does appear that chronic underfunding of agencies, despite serious issues being highlighted, continues, and these things keep happening. The nation was shocked by the brutal and senseless murder of Zara Aleena. A silent vigil was held at the spot where she was attacked in July 2022, and was attended by hundreds of people who'd come to pay their respects. Another vigil was held on the anniversary of her death in June 2023. However, those who always need to be remembered in these horrific cases are the family of the victim. Those people who likely spoke to Zara just hours before her death, who said goodbye to her before her night out and never saw her alive again, who then got a knock on the door which represented the start of them serving their own life sentences. Zara's family released the following tribute, which I want to read out in full. Quote, Zara, 35, a beloved human, child, niece, cousin, granddaughter, friend to all. She was a joy to all of us. She was a carer for her mother and a grandmother. Caring for others came so naturally to her. Zara was friendly. She was everybody's friend. She was everybody's daughter, everybody's niece, everybody's sister, everybody's cousin. She was pure of heart. She was a joy to all of us, her sparkling eyes and curly jet black hair, her glorious laughter and her sweet smiling voice. Her tiny frame embodied a passionate spirit and indomitable energy. Zara was brought up by the whole family. She was our love in human form. At the age of 5, she said she was going to be a lawyer. Shrieking with joy when she spotted the birds as a child, she would giggle and make us laugh. She was always the bigger person in any situation. She was authentic and refused to try and impress anyone, but she impressed us. She was the rock of our family. Zara was stoic and held it all together and never complained. She glued our community together. Nobody worked harder than Zara, is what we heard from all who knew her. Zara was happy, and at a point in her life when her joy was radiating and blossoming, she was ready to make a family of her own. Her sense of justice and fairness led her to a life of giving and caring for others, supporting refugees fleeing violence, giving voice to those who had less power. She had that special habit of noticing others in need and always put their needs on her agenda, a carefree spirit with the most caring heart. Zara was happy, and at a point in her life that she had worked hard for, she had completed her legal practice course so that she could practice as a solicitor. She only recently started working for the Royal Courts of Justice to complete her 2-year work placement and also become a fully qualified solicitor. She was fierce. She didn't just survive, she thrived. She walked everywhere. She put her party shoes in a bag and donned her trainers. She walked. Zara believed that a woman should be able to walk home. Now, her dreams of a family are shattered, her future brutally taken. Sadly, Zara is not the only one who's had their life taken at the hands of a stranger. We all know women should be safe on our streets. She was in the heart of her community, 10 minutes from home. We all need to be talking about what happened to our Zara. We all need to be talking about this tragedy. These last few days have been shocking and unimaginable. In a savage, sickening act, she was murdered by a stranger. She's not the only woman who has lost her life like this. In the moment of this tragedy, we extend our deepest sympathy and love to the families of Bibba Henry, Nicole Spallman, Sarah Everard, Sabina Nessa, Aisling Murphy, and many more women. We must prevent and stop violence against women and girls. Our loss is irreparable, and the void feels insurmountable, but the warmth and kindness that our community has shown is testament to the power of Zara's spirit. Her life has been stolen from us. She has been stolen from all of us. Rest in power, Zara, Natasha Aleena. Even in the depths of their pain, the family of Zara wanted to acknowledge the names of other women who have been murdered by male strangers, and they issued a call to action to stop other families from having to go through the pain that they will inevitably experience each and every day for the rest of their lives. Their bravery is something that I think all of us should have massive respect for. I also fully support their message. Violence against women and girls must stop. People like Zara should not fear simply walking down the street in their own town. She must also never be forgotten. Rest in peace, Zara. Jordan McSweeney is unfortunately, like almost all of the people I cover, a product of shitty parenting. He was neglected, exposed to violence repeatedly, and was able to do whatever he wanted without consequence. The only things he was taught was that violence solves everything, that he should be allowed to do whatever he wanted. In addition, during his childhood, he developed a hatred of women. This inevitably stemmed from his mother, and likely included the fact that she didn't look after him or protect him from the revolving door of abusive men she brought into the home. I've read that Jordan McSweeney has a personality disorder, although I cannot find any record of which one or how many he may have, but I imagine he has antisocial personality disorder, given his repeated rule breaking, complete disregard for the welfare of others, persistent dishonesty, and from what I've read, no real guilt or remorse for his behaviour. He also believed that he was entitled to take anything he wanted. If he needed money, he'd break into somewhere or rob someone. People in Jordan McSweeney's life were only there for one thing: to cater to him. Even people he considered friends were not off limits. He seemed proud stabbing them in the back to get what he wanted. McSweeney was a user, pure and simple. He had no desire to add anything to the world, only to take as much as possible. His hatred of women, pro-violent attitudes, and belief he could do whatever he wanted are the integral elements to understanding Jordan McSweeney He would use violence towards anyone who got in his way, but women, they were beneath him, a lesser form of life, and if they displeased him in any way, or did not give him what he wanted, then he would utterly brutalise them. How dare they say no to him? No doubt the abuse he subjected Samantha Bryan to followed this template. If she even so much as put a foot out of place, he would beat her, stamping on her head, not only to punish her, but also using her as a way to take out all of his anger and hatred towards women in general. In my opinion, the only reason why Jordan McSweeney did not kill a woman earlier was because he spent most of his adult life in prison. This fact also shows us that he had no real connection with society. Each time he was released, it was just another opportunity to get high and drunk as quickly as possible, before inevitably being sent back. And that was his mentality when he was released in June 2022, just 9 days before murdering Zara. Instantly, he got drunk. The party to him had just started. Might as well enjoy it, until I end up back inside again. On the 25th of June, he was looking for sex and would not take no for an answer. He began in a pub and made advances towards women. They rejected him, and I imagine this increased his anger significantly. They had no right to turn him down. So he took to the streets, and it's clear that his intention was to find someone to rape. No one says no to Jordan McSweeney. With each woman he followed, and who got away, his anger inevitably increased, especially with regards to the last woman he followed. He'd hidden himself and was ready to attack, but she'd escaped. And then he saw Zara Aleena, and he decided she would be his victim. She was not a woman to him, she was a thing, a piece of meat he could use and abuse to gain gratification. He then followed and attacked her. The savagery of the attack is almost beyond belief. I think this was fueled by his anger, that his previous attempts to attack women had come to nothing, his hatred of all women generally, but also the fact that Zara dared to try and fight him off. In his sick mind, she should have submitted to what he wanted, because it was what he was entitled to. He then returned to Zara repeatedly, using horrific and gratuitous violence on her, stamping on her head again and again and again. McSweeney aiming at her head and coming back to inflict more damage to this area shows the level of hatred for women that he truly had. He aimed at this area, in my opinion, to completely obliterate Zara's face, to destroy her identity entirely, his punishment to her for daring to be a gender that he despised so much. Jordan McSweeney is a monster, and an utter coward who was too weak to even face his own punishment. I imagine he still has no remorse for his behaviour. I hope that he's never released. He is a man who believes the rules do not apply to him, and that people are merely there for him to use, abuse, violate and kill. If he ever sees freedom again, I think within days of being released, he would likely commit another murder. Jordan McSweeney is a truly evil man, who fully deserves to end his days behind prison walls. So, what are your thoughts on this case? Feel free to leave your comments below. If you like the content, then please consider becoming a channel member. You get early access to videos and an icon next to your name. Also, if you want to help support the channel, then consider sending a super thanks, which is a one-off donation. Please like, share and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.